With 57 participating states in Europe, Asia, and North America, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is the world's largest regional security organization. The OSCE is an inclusive forum for dialogue on security issues and a platform for joint action to improve the lives of individuals and communities throughout the OSCE area. The OSCE's approach to security is comprehensive, and its engagement covers many relevant areas, from hard security issues such as conflict prevention and arms control, to fostering economic development, ensuring the sustainable use of natural resources, and promoting full respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The OSCE traces its origins to the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which led to the signing of the Helsinki Final Act in 1975, a groundbreaking agreement that established 10 fundamental principles for governing relations between states, focusing on cooperation and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Today, the OSCE is an intergovernmental organization in which all 57 participating states work as equals. Decisions are taken by consensus on a politically binding basis. Each year, a different participating state chairs the organization, with that country's foreign minister serving as chairperson in office. A ministerial council meeting is held annually to review OSCE activities and provide overall direction, while ambassadors meet each week in Vienna at the Permanent Council and the Forum for Security Cooperation. The OSCE has several structures, each with its own area of competence and mandate. The OSCE Secretary-General acts as the representative of the chairperson in office and supports him or her in all activities aimed at advancing the goals of the OSCE. The Secretary-General is also the organization's chief administrative officer and heads the Secretariat based in Vienna, which directly supports the chairmanship. As a tool of conflict prevention, the High Commissioner on National Minorities, based in The Hague, uses quiet diplomacy and early action to seek resolution of ethnic tensions that might endanger peace, security, and stability. The representative on freedom of the media, based in Vienna, provides early warning on violations of freedom of expression and media freedom, and promotes full compliance with OSCE media freedom commitments. The Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, based in Warsaw, promotes respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law, strengthens democratic institutions, and promotes tolerance and non-discrimination, and acts as the OSCE contact point on Roma and Sinti issues. The Parliamentary Assembly brings together more than 300 lawmakers from the parliaments of OSCE participating states to promote interparliamentary dialogue and cooperation. Most of the OSCE's staff and resources are deployed in field operations that support their host countries in the implementation of their OSCE commitments, or, like the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, are engaged in crisis management or conflict prevention activities. The OSCE helps to bridge differences and build trust. At no time in recent history has this mission been more vital for European security than it is today. In times of growing division within Europe and increasingly complex transnational and global threats and challenges, the OSCE remains a key regional platform for inclusive dialogue and joint action.
this is something that it's not philosophical. It's empirically you can show that over and over and over again, and yet we still have a lot of governments that adhere to the opposite view. But it's, as I say, it's something that it's not just the human rights are saying that. It's our military and counterterrorism people, because it's absolutely in our interest that governments learn to open up a little bit.
Before opening up the questions to the audience, do any of the panelists have questions for Ambassador Kozak?
Ambassador Kozak, thank you very much for your remarks. I wonder if you could maybe speak a little bit more specifically about the situation in Uzbekistan and what constitutes the dialogue you're having with the new Uzbek government about what they would need to do to get off of the CPC list. Thank you.
No, thank you, Duncan. I had the interesting experience, not this last year at HDIM, but the year before. President Karimov died like the day before HDIM started or something. I don't know. It was a very short time, and the senior representative that they had sent there wanted to talk and was bringing messages from the new government about how they wanted to change their ways and get out from not just CPC designation, but the whole aspect that they have of being bad on human rights. And we gave them some initial thoughts to be more open with NGOs, and they, to their credit, invited some of the American NGOs there, giving them high-level access so that they could hear from them. Release of prisoners. They've released a number of long-term political prisoners. Our IRF colleagues have been trying to give them things that they could do on that front. I mean, our concerns are pretty well known. We try not to say, do these 5 things and we'll let you off the hook, because we can't judge how difficult some of those things are. So it's like, okay, here are 15 things, and if you did enough of them, it would really start to change the perception of what you're doing. So I think we're kind of at an early stage of this. They had the special rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief come and visit them. So we're basically promoting those things because other people can give them good ideas too. It's not just exclusively the U.S. government. But we're hoping as soon as we get Governor Brown back on board, Senate willing, that we'll make a real effort at that one, because there seems to be at least some receptivity to not just maintaining the status quo. And so our thought is the more engagement, the better. But we don't have like a bright line test for what it would be. And there's so many problems there that they could, if they did 5 or 6 significant steps, that would be helpful to people in the society, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Just had a question regarding the situation of Jehovah's Witnesses in Kazakhstan. Mm-hmm. We seem to be caught between 2 forces within the government. There's one force that seems to be leaning towards applying the rule of law, protecting our rights, and opposing forces that are seeking to imitate what's going on in Russia. And I appreciate so much that you mentioned the situation of Timur Akhmedov, who's in prison right now, basically on trumped-up charges. Do you have a comment on whether the rule of law is strengthening, or whether the legal status that we have right now is even more in danger?
In Kazakhstan. Yeah, it's, I'm trying to predict, because I think you're right, you get these different forces, and particularly when a lot of these states in that region, they've had the same leader since they became independent, and as President Karimov dying shows that nobody is immortal. Mm-hmm. And so I think people are like thinking about somewhere down the line, and unfortunately Jehovah's Witnesses and other groups get caught up in all of that. So it's kind of hard to predict what they will do. I mean, what I can say more is what we're urging them to do, which is follow the rule of law. Don't persecute groups and they've tried to do it a la Russia, as you say, where they say, well, any religious thought that isn't approved by the government is, quote, extremism. And it's like, when was the last time that, a band of Jehovah's Witnesses took up arms and, attacked somebody? It's just...
Never.
Yeah, exactly. So it's manifestly absurd what they're worrying about. And that's what we're trying to get across to them is like, don't do it. But, it is, as you say, it's a struggle to try to figure out these. You become, sort of a surrogate or something for other struggles that are going on and trying to, but I think the best we can do is to push back and say, look, neither one of you have an interest in picking a big fight over this, and what does it get you? So we need to increase the cost and then also increase the reward of doing the right thing. And
Thank you.
Good. We'll keep trying, as I know you will.
Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador. I was actually just very recently back from Uzbekistan, which is an interesting trip, but last night we hosted with Senator Langford a briefing on the Hill on Turkey. We had a different commission delegation there, other members of the commission very recently. They were actually the first Americans who are not from the embassy and not his family to see Pastor Brunson since his detention, and that was obviously a very affecting experience for them. And so in the little picture, not that it's insignificant, but just in terms of focus on one person, it seems like they're holding this man hostage. They want Gula and other things. And then in the big picture, of course, everyone's aware of the extreme exacerbation of the situation there for human rights in general in the last year and a half, and the rising authoritarianism of Erdogan. So my question is, it's sensitive, I guess, but is what's next for U.S. policy? Is there going to be, should we expect, or what could we expect in terms of a response on these issues, or are political and economic and military considerations with the situation in the Middle East too great that we're just gonna have to look the other way on these things?
Well, I don't think anybody is arguing for just looking the other way. It's, but you're right that there is a tension in there. I mean, this all started with the attempted coup in 2016, which we condemned and believed that the Turkish government was absolutely entitled to go after and through a transparent legal process bring to justice the people who had perpetrated that. Instead, they've extended over and over beyond all reason the state of emergency, used it then to go after, again, this whole cacophony of groups where sometimes it's hard to even figure out why they're going after somebody on grounds that they're Gulenist or something. So that remains a matter of big concern. We talk about it privately, we talk about it publicly. We're urging the Turks, as Secretary Tillerson did publicly, to not just to release Pastor Brunson, who, as he said, was just, there's absolutely no justification for holding this man, but for all of the similar actions that they've taken against other people. I mean, tens or hundreds of thousands of people now that have been, removed from their jobs and so on sort of vague allegations of association with Gulenists. On the other side of it, though, Turkey remains a valued NATO ally, very important partner in a number of activities there, and we have to pursue those as well. So I think it's not an either-or deal, but it's a how do we walk and chew gum and try to deal with both sets of issues at the same time, and not always easy. We saw, unfortunately, the Turkish representative at HDIM walked out on the first day on grounds that the OSCE had registered an American NGO that the Turks accused of being Gulenist. And, we said, no, we ought to apply the rules that if an organization is on the UN terror list or something, yes, but you can't just declare somebody a terrorist in order to keep them from attending a meeting. So a lot of difficult conversations with the Turkish authorities, but at the same time also trying to find those areas where we have common interests and work with them on that. And stay tuned. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll now open up the discussion to those of you that are here in the audience, if you could please state your name, and if you have an affiliation, state that as well. And we do have probably quite a few questions as well as our subsequent panelists, and so if you could keep both your comments and your questions brief, very much appreciated.
Step to the microphone.
Yes, and if you could step to the microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great to see you outside of the students from the outside in Warsaw. My name is Alex. I'm Charles Kozak. I want to ask about a country where almost half of political prisoners are actually religious prisoners, and there are centers that they get less attention in the U.S. than others. And if that's the case, I wonder why. And my second question, I do see your point about the Magnitsky Act and waiving the act towards countries which deem to have less borders when it comes to Afghanistan and other national security related issues. But what contradicts that opinion is about repression, let's say, radicalization through repression in the context of Azerbaijan. And that is a challenge too. So which one is harder? So should we talk about Afghanistan or New Afghanistan? This continues to be the case. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. On political prisoners versus religious prisoners, we tend to deal with them together. Often it's difficult to get into the heads of the persecutor to figure out, were they persecuting this person because of their faith, or were they persecuting them because their faith group is suspected of being politically opposed to the government or something like that. So we don't tend to prioritize one over the other. Obviously, if it's our ambassador at large for religious freedom who's out talking to another government, they tend to focus on people where it's very apparent that they're in for religious reasons. The rest of us tend to run the two together and pick. Oftentimes, too, what you try to do is you want to start to get a chink in the armor of the other side. So, if they've got thousands of political prisoners, you go in and say, well, you ought to release all thousands of them, and they say, we heard you, we're not going to do that, they're terrorists, and that's the end of the conversation. But when you're able to say, okay, here are 4 people or something that you've got in, and we've really studied their cases, and there's no justification, you have a better shot at it. But when you do that, you can then multiply on that and say, okay, you let those 4 go, and you actually got some good press out of it. And here are 10 more people that are very, very similar to the ones you just. So it's a tactical deal how you approach that. On the national security stuff and whether you care about Afghanistan or Iran, we care about all of them, the threats posed by all, and these are judgment calls. There's, is it better to keep some sanction on somebody to make our point, and can we forego their cooperation on something we care about? And sometimes the answer is yes, that the cooperation isn't that valuable and making the point is. Other times it's, we've got an immediate problem here we have to deal with, we need their cooperation on that, so we'll waive the sanction. But it's not like we're not doing anything, we're also calling them to task and making comments about them in the UN system and the OSCE and so on. So it's how do you get the sweet spot between all of those? It's always the dilemma.
There are additional questions from the audience. If you could please come to the microphone if you're able to. And I also, just a reminder that those of you that are watching online, you can actually pose questions on Facebook as well.
I have a pretty good voice, but I'll use this. Ambassador Kozak, I'm a retired State Department and worked in DRL for a number of years. So recently when our president began to emphasize sovereignty, it gave me some pause, because as most of us know very well, in many countries, individual freedoms, including religious freedom, simply do not play a part in the rights that are recognized. for people.
Yeah.
And that's a determination of the government in the exercise of their sovereignty. And if we are emphasizing recognition of sovereignty, have we diminished our grounds for speaking to these countries about their violations of what we can consider the rights of their citizens or residents of their territory? And if so, how are you working around that?
Okay, good question. Good DRL colleague. I think it's when the president has emphasized sovereignty and so on, it was more in the sense that we're not going to be constrained by constructs of groupings of countries that, I mean, it's been largely in the trade area and so on, but that we should be able to go out and state our own point of view and be able to deal with other countries as we see, fits our own interests, which includes promotion of human rights. I think he and the secretary have both been clear on that. But it's not saying that sovereignty means that you can ignore God-given human rights. And I think that they've come across pretty strongly on that as well. I think when the secretary rolled out the Religious Freedom Report, he said, well, I don't want to just call out our enemies, I want to call out our friends too. And he did. He expressed concern about a number of countries that we have very close relationships with. So I think what you see as you go kind of issue by issue, what are we doing about it? The administration's been very clear that, for example, people should not had violence committed against them or be discriminated against because of their religion, because of their political view, because of their status as LGBT, because of disabilities. I mean, it's all the things we've always been concerned about. But what they're coming at it from the standpoint of the individual. No individual should be subjected to that, regardless of what the supposed motivation is. I think the thing I would mention that maybe will make you a little more hopeful is internationally at the HDIM. I was really taken by how thoroughly we won the battle of ideas on individual rights versus state sovereignty during the Cold War. As each of those countries got up and talked, you either had countries like Uzbekistan who were earnestly trying to explain the reforms they were undertaking to comply with OSCE commitments and so on, or you had the Russias of the world standing up and saying, well, the Americans and the Western Europeans violate all these things too, so nobody should blame us. But they weren't questioning that these were the standards that you should live up to. That it was either you're just as bad as I am, or I'm really trying to be better, was sort of the thing. And I think that was good, and it's a strength that we have and that we can work with. The fact that is widely accepted now as that universal human rights really are universal. And even the Russians tried their old trick of saying, well, we have to spend a day on economic, social, and cultural rights, because those are just as important as civil and political rights. And our people, to get the agenda agreed to that. So when it came time to do it, I led off and read our statement about what we do to protect economic, social, and cultural rights in the U.S. The Russians gave a speech about how disgraceful it was that the U.S. wouldn't speak to this issue. And it was like, were you listening? And it was a tactic from their standpoint, from the old Soviet playbook. But then they didn't bother themselves to talk about economic, social, and cultural rights in Russia. So it's really a strength that we've got, is that we are so, that the values that we hold dear have been so well internalized internationally. And you really don't get that pushback about, oh, well, these, we don't have to follow these values because we have sovereignty. They're all trying to explain that either. That's why the Russians and the others, the Turks and everybody, go to these great lengths to create these anti-terrorism laws and all, because they they're trying to find some way to justify what they're doing rather than just saying it's okay for us to be doing this. So this is something we can work with, and we can keep holding people to account. And I think it's a strength we forget we have, and we ought to use it more often.
Hello, thank you for being here today. My name is Nathan Weininger. I'm the Director of Policy Relations with the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. My question, as an advocacy organization, we interact with all sorts of different organizations around the world on international religious freedom. And as you work with foreign governments or talk to foreign officials or travel abroad, and this question can be for anyone on the panel, what are the particular policy mechanisms that you see, such as the Global Magnitsky Act, that are sort of people within foreign governments are starting to look at and pay attention to as potential areas where we could begin to advocate more effectively?
I think some of the mechanisms we have are that are most effective are sometimes the ones that are least dramatic. When you mentioned, working with civil society groups, one of the things that our embassies do all over the world, and that we do when we travel abroad, but also our colleagues from the regional bureaus, the secretary himself, the president, is meet with civil society. And just when somebody is being repressed in a country, the fact that a senior foreign official will meet with the repressed people, it's a real dig at the government. The government usually is trying to say, we can repress you, and we can make the Americans stand by and ignore it, and so don't think you'll ever be able to get out from this. Just by having a meeting with them, we destroy that narrative and say, look, we value our engagement with the people in civil society or in the religious community that we're meeting with as much as we do that with the government, and that tends to equalize them up. So that's a huge thing. Doesn't cost very much. It isn't, you don't have to have legal sanctions and have the Treasury and everything else doing it. But I think that is effective. The calling people out, we use the UN mechanisms a lot. We use OSCE a lot to say, what about this, what about that? We, during HDIM, we had and still have going on the oppression of gay men in Chechnya. And we were every day asking the Russians, what are you doing about this? And they didn't have their story down straight, and they would tell a different story every day and then contradict themselves in the press, and we had a good time. But that put pressure on them. I mean, we weren't doing it to embarrass the Russian government. We were doing it to get them to do serious investigation and put a stop to this. So I think that can be effective too. But then we have a variety of tools. One that often gets done and nobody knows about is in the Immigration and Nationality Act. There are exclusions for people who've committed torture or extrajudicial killings and so on. And our consular officers just apply that and deny your visa. And it doesn't necessarily involve a big policy action, but it means something to the person who had it denied. And then we have the more sort of policy-oriented exclusions as well that we can, either under Section 212 AC3 or 214B, or not 214B is exclusion for 212F is what 214B is what happens to you when you don't have visible means of support. You get denied. But anyway, the upshot is those kinds of things can have a real effect on people. I've been dealing with Venezuela of late, and there we denied and revoked the visas of a number of people who were involved in repression, including like top generals and judge prosecutors who were persecuting people. And the impact is pretty sizable. You get other ones coming saying, please, what do I have to do to stay off your bad list? And the answer is don't repress people. But they make me do that. Well, no, you could actually resign or refuse to do it or something. So there's a lot of tools like that are very effective. The big sanctions can be effective, but they're kind of a blunderbuss weapon. You sometimes hit more than you intend. So But it's again, it's finding the right combination of, rhetorical. We do programmatic things to try to strengthen oppressed groups in other countries and give them support. Financial stuff, visa stuff, solidarity. All of those things in the right mix can have a real impact. But it's a constantly moving game too. You can't just do something and then sit back and watch it. You have to keep working it.
We have a question from one of our viewers on Facebook.
We do, from James on Facebook. He says, your genuine interest in the treatment of religious minorities such as the Jehovah's Witnesses is commendable. Have you seen any movement on the part of decision-making bodies in Russia that provides any basis for change?
I guess my answer as of today would be no, unfortunately. But we don't give up easy, so keep trying to bring us to their attention and see if we can get them to change their ways.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
As always, as you can see, you have the rare diplomat who's transparent and candid, which is always much appreciated. So, thank you for your remarks and your insights.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the Commission for keeping the focus on these issues. It really makes a difference. That's another thing you can do when I'm adding to the list of measures is exactly this kind of thing. It does help.
So now we'll return to the rest of our panel, starting with Chairman Mark.
Excuse me for bailing on you.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Pardon me, can I remind everybody to speak up and into their microphones? The folks online are having a tough time hearing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much to my friend, Mr. Hurd, and thank you to the Helsinki Commission, particularly the chairman and co-chairman, Senator Wicker and Representative Smith, for holding a briefing on this very important topic. As you heard, my name is Nathaniel Hurd, and I'm chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, as we are affectionately known. A quick word about USCIRF. USCIRF was created in 1998 by the International Religious Freedom Act. You heard a bunch about that just before, commonly known as IRFA. IRFA also created the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom, as well as the position of Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. We are very pleased that President Trump has nominated Governor Brownback to that position. It's a position that ought to be filled, and we do hope that the Senate will end its delays and swiftly confirm him to this critical position, as Ambassador Kozak said. We at USCIRF are tasked by Congress to monitor and review religious freedom abroad and to make policy recommendations to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. To that end, Nathan's question was very germane in thinking about what are the things that actually work. If I could just digress for one moment on that and say that another thing, especially just coming back from the Uzbekistan trip, been very much on my mind, not just thinking about which policies are the big policies that are most effective, but what are the very specific things you can ask them to do that are doable, that you can really get. And so just to finish that thought with a specific example in Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan, the government recently approved for 3,000 more copies of the Christian Bible to be printed in that country and distributed. But that's not enough, right? Can they do more, right? You can ask them, can we have 3,000 more? Can they register, not just open up registration, that'll take time, but can they register one church in an area that has no churches? It's a very large country. Typically, Christian preachers are not allowed to preach in the Uzbek language, and not even allowed to have somebody doing simultaneous translation next to them. Can they allow perhaps preaching? They do that, of course, to prevent the religion from spreading. But right, these are things that are very specific, very concrete, and relatively small compared to the big things that we also need them to accomplish. And so that helps, and I say that in the context of talking about our mandate to make recommendations, which include the kinds of things that Nathan was asking about, but also thinking about recommendations to the U.S. government to ask for very specific and concrete things that are doable. In any case, as part of our mandate, the other thing we do that you heard about is we make the recommendations to the State Department for CPC designations, countries of particular concern. In April, along with the release of our annual report, which is out every year on time by the legislative legislatively mandated deadline. We recommend 16 countries for designation as CPC because we believe they meet the legal standard of perpetrating or tolerating, quote, systematic, ongoing, and egregious, unquote, violations of international religious freedom.